This episode of Just the Tip-Sters is sponsored by Clean Spa Bath & Body. That's clean with a K. Cleanspa.com. Clean Spa. Prepare to smell delicious.
From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's the 100th episode of Just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
I come in peace.
If you've got a tip for Melissa, a funny story someone told you at a party that actually sounded pretty creepy, a lead on a cold case, how to get out of the Costco parking lot without killing a dozen people pulling their stupid carts in the middle of the lane, anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. And now here's your host, 100 episodes in, and she still gets all aglow at the sound of the word spatter, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell! And kudos to you, Producer Mark, for saying spatter. Apparently in the law enforcement world, if you say splatter, well, you're a piker or something.
They know that you're a rookie.
Yeah. Jinx on me, Coke. Yeah, you're
exactly.
a rookie. Yeah, I have a friend who works in the medical supply field, and I was like, oh, tell me about what you do. I mean, I carry a box of, Natril gloves in my car. And he's like, why? And I'm like, in case I come upon a crime scene and I don't want to contaminate it, so I just spatter and then run away. Yeah, I just scream spatter and run away.
You kind of look down and yell spatter and then run.
I do carry gloves with me in the car.
I didn't know that. I really didn't know that.
I do have a box of gloves of CVS.
That is kind of interesting.
And Kate, look, what if there's an accident? I don't want to be infected with bloodborne.
I totally get it. No, I get it, actually.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I also
don't really get it.
No, I know you don't get it. Look, I don't carry a gun. You got
me so wound up there. I knocked my microphone.
Welcome to my world. You would think after 100 episodes we'd have this shit down.
Yeah, you think?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
No.
Learning every day. Every day, something new and different popping up. I have to tell you, I don't know that I could be more excited that this is our 100th episode, because honest to God, in my heart, I did not think we'd make it here. I did not think I would. Let me just correct that. I did not think I would make it here. And a large part of the time I am here because Producer Mark has poked me really hard with a letter opener to get me to get into the podcast room to fucking start talking.
I have never had to do that.
Verbally.
And I always knew you would do it because you are driven to do this. Folks, Melissa sometimes spends weeks on a single case researching, and she's prepared. Every week we are ready to go, even though sometimes she says she's not. All we need to do is really just start the tape rolling and the virtual tape rolling, and she's on it.
Yeah, you do a very funny impression of me, and it's really close to the truth, where I'll just be pacing up and down on the hallway outside the podcast room, crying and yelling and beating my breast and saying I'm awful and this is terrible. No one's going to hear this and I'm going to fuck it up. And you're like, okay, we're ready to roll. And you're like, oh, and I'm like, and you're like, okay, 3, 2, 1, hi. And then I just start talking.
Right.
So
exactly. More cowbell and we're off.
So the time has come to announce the winner of the 20-ounce tumbler from Southern Girl Creations that Shelly created especially for the podcast. It has our logo. It has a lovely lid. It has a lovely straw. It has a $10 Starbucks gift card that comes with it. And I was overwhelmed by the number of people entered. We had a drawing, I don't know how many months ago, for a serial killer coloring book. And I think we got 15 entries. And I don't know if it's the Starbucks card or what drove people batshit crazy. We got so many entries, my hand hurt from writing everyone's name down, which I did, by the way. I'm old school. But I put them on little lined pieces of paper from a legal pad, which I had to cut 4 sheets of legal pad.
She took this seriously, folks.
All the pieces were of equal size, so no one could get, an advantage. I put them in where I think you should always put a drawing for a true crime podcast giveaway, into my LA County coroner baseball hat. And I drew the name out. I just drew the name out, and I even extended the entry time by 12 hours for one person who knows who she is. And I am very excited, which we'll tell the name of the winner in just a moment, and I can't wait to notify her. But before that, having the post on social media is a double-edged sword, and that's the way you get the word out. But having you call in and email us was a good thing, because I got to hear you and know you, some of you, better. I can't believe the number of entries from Australia. It was insane. How many, and 3 women named Susan or Suzanne. We had doubles. I had to put their last initial, so if I drew their name, I knew which one it was. A couple of different spellings too, but it was a really great thing for me to see. Maybe it's just you're all a bunch of whores and you want a tumbler and a $10 gift card, but I think it's a bunch of beautiful people who listen to the podcast, and
it's that.
I was just kidding about the whore part, but I can't believe how adorable she is, and it didn't dawn on me to ask anyone to call and give us a recorded congratulations, but Nikki T, the host of Strictly Homicide, is the cutest dang girl in the world. And she was like, this is so exciting, I want to call in. I was like, what the hell? And she did, and it's so sweet. And we also get to hear from her dog, Lucy. Can you play that beautiful message for us, Producer Mark?
Melissa, it's Nikki T from Strictly Homicide. And I just wanted to tell you, happy 100th episode. And apparently Lucy, my dog, is really excited too. I don't know if you can hear her. Say hi. Well, anyways, keep it going, because we love you. Oh, there she goes. Oh, love you.
So that's the sweetest thing. And for our 200th episode, maybe we'll have other podcast hosts or anyone who wants to congratulate us, if we're still here, call in, because that's the sweetest thing. What a lovely thing that Nikki did. And her dog Lucy sounds adorable. I'm just grateful she didn't hold the phone up to her bearded dragon Groot, who is usually on one of her shoulders.
She has a bearded dragon?
She has a bearded dragon, and that's not code for her vagina. It is actually a reptilian specimen. He's very beautiful, and I've learned a lot about them, which I never wanted to learn, but you can't help it if you're friends with Nikki, because every other picture is, she has children too, but you wouldn't know unless they were bearded dragons. I think she's madly in love with at least one of them. She has 2 bearded dragons. She has like a little menagerie at her house, but she's the sweetest girl, and we thank you, Nikki, for that beautiful congratulations for the 100th episode. And I don't have a drum, but I'm going to do a tiny drum roll on my desk. And the winner of the tumbler is Danian, and I'm so happy it's her. Not that everyone who entered, I wouldn't love it to give all of you one, but it's a really special thing that Shelly made, and I'm so excited that the tumbler and the gift card are going to Danian. She's adorable, and she found us through another friend of hers, and she binged, listened, and then was mad because she was out of episodes. So that's one of the reasons I adore her. So that's going to her, and we're really grateful to everybody who entered, and we'll be doing more giveaways. And I'm just so happy that people even gave a shit and cared and entered. I'm just really grateful that we are here. There's just, I'm just really grateful to get to do something that I love so very much, and to have anyone at all even hearing it, and it's a blessing. And we do have a couple of announcements for our 100th episode. One is we're so grateful to the people that have left reviews, because we had one-star review from someone who was an angry human being who identified herself in all caps as a crime junkie. So I'm not sure, maybe she's leaving me a message. I don't know. But it took 8 or 9 reviews after that to bring our rating back up. It's really bizarre how it works, but I'm so grateful to the reviews this week. We got one from Ms. Jet, and she said that I have a perfect voice for podcasting, which it was the nicest thing ever. And then she said, I enjoy listening to her. And then she had what I thought at the end was ATT. And I didn't know if she was trying to tell me to switch providers, but it turns out it was A++.
So she wasn't a marketer.
No, she wasn't working.
And by the way, she said you had a perfect voice for radio, which is the truth, and which is what this is.
I'm actually reading from what her review was, and she's the one that said a perfect voice for podcasting. So back off, producer
somebody
Mark.
said radio. I'm sorry.
I'll get to that one if you shut up. Thanks for ruining everything.
I'm going to shut up now.
God damn it. So yeah, Ms. Jet gave me an A++. She does not want me to switch to AT&T, and either of those things would be fine with me, but I'm very grateful for her sweet review. We got a lovely review from the Ginger Tree, which is a great name for your Apple account. And she says, I'm saying she. It could be a very tall ginger tree man too, but Melissa's humor, expert research, and storytelling skills will always surprise and delight you. She's got the goods, which is like, the nicest thing. I've got the goods. And of course, what producer Mark was talking about is Bella 22429, and this is my favorite review this week, and it brings up this troubling point. What she said was, I found this podcast by accident. I don't understand why I've never heard of it. I listen to tons of true crime podcasts, and Melissa has a voice made for radio, which is what producer Mark was talking about. I really enjoy her sense of humor, blah, blah, blah. Oh, here's the part. I think he remembered it because she said extremely well produced. I think he just wants to hear Bella say nice things about him. But
no, that's not it. I thought what she said about your perfect voice for radio is right on the money.
Well,
that's kind of what makes this podcast different. Is that you know radio. You have a history of being in radio. You know how to talk to people, and I can't tell you how proud I am of you and how how you sound.
Well, that's very sweet of you, producer Mark. I appreciate that very much. And I mean, people either like your voice or they don't. It happened, producer Mark can vouch for me. He was home. It happened this week where someone called and I had the phone on speakerphone and I answered and they said, Mr. Morgan? And I said, this is Ms. Morgan. How can I help you? Oh, Ms. Morgan. By then I'm like, click. So
it was,
it happens.
I mean,
am I right, producer Mark?
You say it happens all the time, and I believe you.
It does.
But that was the first time I actually heard it because you had it on speakerphone.
I did have it on speakerphone. It happens to me. I used to say every day, but probably a couple times a week. Is the lady of the house available? Hold on, Mark. You want to pick up the phone? I know they can't help it. And it's one of those things where if a large number of people say it, you begin to think, what the fuck is wrong with me? But, I have a deep voice. You either like it or you don't. You think I'm a dude or you don't. I get it. That's why there's 31 flavors. We're all different. You either, that's fine. But I appreciate the beautiful reviews and what producer Mark said and what Bella said and what Ms. Jet and the Ginger Tree said. I'm really grateful for all of those things because, what makes up a podcast being seen is some sort of a magical elixir I don't have access to. But I can tell you the people that have found us and like us and tell other people is just a real blessing. And if you have time and desire to go to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating, and if you have time to write us a review, we would be really grateful. It really does help. I apparently help other people find us, and I really didn't.
No, it really does.
I didn't know that.
And and we are starting to get more reviews. In fact, I don't know if you saw this, Melissa, but yesterday we got a brand new one from somebody named JTB Pioneer.
No.
And I'll read it to you. It says, it's 5-star review.
Oh, thank you.
Awesomeness. The stories are awesome. A lot of time and hard work goes into the research.
Oh.
On top of the great stories, you get to hear them told by the sultry voice of Melissa, and humor added by Mark. Yes, I'm just the sidekick.
Yeah, you're my...
Like I said, awesomeness, exclamation point.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Thank you, JTB Pioneer.
Oh, JTB. I bet I know who that is.
Oh, really?
Yes, because we went to Simon Kenton High School.
Oh.
Which I bet you I know who that is. I'm going to see if that's who that is. And what would be really awesome is it's a dude.
Oh.
Because, true crime is 80% of the people who listen to true crime podcasts are female. And I get it because we're typically the ones who get the short end of the stick when it comes to crime. So I think I know who that is. If it's who I think it is, I will get to see him in Kentucky and give him a big hug.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, if it's who I think it is. That's nice. It's amazing when people like your podcast, because it happens with every podcast host I know. They're like, my friends and family won't listen to my podcast. You end up,
it really
finding love from strangers.
It's annoying, I get my mom, oh, you're doing a podcast. I want to listen to it. So I played her a little bit of one. And she goes, oh, I'm gonna subscribe. We showed her how to subscribe on her phone. And then, a couple months later, so what do you think of the podcast? Huh?
Right.
What? Oh, yeah.
That thing. I totally get it. It is not for everyone. And, there's was it Tom Wolfe that said you have to leave home to get any sort of recognition? Or, I mean, I'm butchering what he said, but you either like it or you don't, and I understand. My best friend, who's got a portion of my heart, can't stand crime stories. And she also happens to be a singer with an exquisite voice. And I said, I get it. You can't listen to this the same way if you decided to record a reggae album. I'd be like, I love you, and no fucking way. So
that's right.
I mean, we have things we like, and the fact that our friends and loved ones don't give a shit about what we're doing is kind of funny.
Well,
but it is a beautiful thing that people we don't know have embraced us.
Yeah, and back to the original point, you know what? It is absolutely helpful and important that we get these reviews and the ratings, because it gets us noticed, gets us on the map. I think the reviews that we've gotten over the last couple of months have increased our listenership. It's doubled. Our listenership
it
has doubled.
It actually has. That's true. I hadn't. Sometimes when you're working hard and pushing forward, you just keep your head down and keep working and wondering if it's ever going to pay off. And in the last couple of months, the number of listeners has doubled, and we're still not, a huge deal, but that's okay. The deal that we're
huger though.
the deal that we are to the people that care, that's what matters to me. It's a small but mighty group of amazing human beings, and that's the important thing to me. And speaking of an amazing human being, you know that our podcast is sponsored by Clean Spa by Jennifer Hardaway, and she has dedicated herself to honoring one of the most important senses that we have, our sense of smell. And Jennifer has created an entire business that's centered on her original, unique fragrances that are all found in nature. Everything Clean Spa makes carries one of the dozens of scents that are handcrafted by Jennifer herself. In fact, this week I wanted to send her a message and tell her she has turned me, not that I am into chicks now, but she has turned me into a lover of her sweet smoke scent. And it is fantastic. I love everything she makes with vanilla. That's my go-to. But she has made me open my mind, my eyes, and my sense of smell. And so just some of the examples of what she has created is fresh orange vanilla. It actually just smells like you've got a creamsicle in a jar. So it's got, the sweet notes of vanilla and the crisp orange nectar. She has Gypsy Rose, not the woman who hires her boyfriend to kill her mother, but Gypsy Rose that carries the aroma of fresh rose petals that are kissed with sweet geranium. And all of these amazing original scents are blended into any of Clean Spa's moisturizers, cleanses, body washes, scrubs, even a room freshener. And most of all, in addition to the wide variety of pre-designed natural scents, at Clean Spa, you can actually design your own fragrance, which is one of the things that makes Jennifer stand out above anyone else who makes any sort of, body supplies like this. It's Jennifer's ability to be a fabulous mixtress. So you can make anything that your imagination can dream up, Jennifer can make for you. I can vouch for that. So visit cleanspa.com and learn about all of the incredible products that she has. And remember to enter the promo code Tip-Sters at the checkout, and you get 15% off your total order. That's Clean Spa with a K, cleanspa.com. Prepare to smell delicious. So this 100th episode is really the brainchild of Tipster Becca. She is also a Kentucky girl, and she has emailed us several times saying that she likes and appreciates the show, and that since she's from Kentucky, she knows we have a kindred spirit. But she had sent this, and the ray line of her email was so funny because it was like kind of a tip. And it was a bigger tip than she or I could have even imagined. She sent it several weeks ago, and I had been trying to figure out what to do for this 100th episode. I just felt like it was a big deal, and we needed to mark it with something different, something special. And I thought, okay, what case would you want to cover for your 100th episode that you haven't done yet? And I looked through, it's like trying to find your favorite child. I couldn't find a favorite story that I wanted to talk about that I hadn't maybe already or wanted to do at a future date. But when this came up, I sat, you can ask producer Mark, I sat for a while thinking, should I do this? Should I not do this? I really went back and forth. And then Tipster Becca recommended a companion piece to the story, which is a documentary. And what I'm talking about is the Carrollton bus crash that happened in 1988 in Carrollton, Kentucky. And the documentary that she recommended was produced by MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And it's really spectacularly well done for an independent documentary. It's called Impact: After the Crash. And it is, it's really well done. It's simple and tells a harrowing story, but has some reenactments that show you what happened. I was very impressed with what they had done with this documentary. And there have actually been a couple of documentaries about the people that survived. There's fantastic coverage from the Courier-Journal in Louisville, Kentucky, and they actually received the Pulitzer Prize in 1989 for general news reporting and their coverage of the crash. There's a book that came out in 1994. The author's name is James Coonan. It's called Reckless Disregard: Corporate Greed, Government Influence, and the Kentucky School Bus Crash. So as you can tell, there's a lot that goes into this story. There's a lot that happened. It has ramifications. If you want to talk about an octopus with tentacles, this story had tentacles that reached far and wide. It was obviously a national story because it's still the largest number of victims from any sort of drunk driving accident, and the largest number of victims from a bus crash, even though there was another bus crash with the same number of fatalities. That bus crash, also in Kentucky, ironically, didn't have the same number of injuries. So this is still a big deal. 1988 and still a big deal. So I guess we'll just get started with the Carrollton bus crash. So on May 14th of 1988, a youth group from the Assembly of God Church in Radcliffe, Kentucky, was headed toward one of the places that if you are anywhere in the tri-state area, it was a destination you couldn't wait to go to once a year, twice a year if you were lucky, and that was the Kings Island amusement park. And it really was a place of joy. It was many of my school bus trips, loved it. Obviously went without school with family members and friends. And it was just something you didn't forget. It was the Ohio version of Disneyland. If you couldn't get to Disneyland or Disney World, Kings Island was a pretty good second or third. It was really...
it was really nationally known, too.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Absolutely. It was a destination, for people in the Midwest.
Yes, it was if you lived there. And it's just a little bit north of Cincinnati. It's actually Mason, Ohio. And from Radcliffe, the town in Kentucky, it's about 170 miles. And it was, mostly members of the Assembly of God Church. There were 4 adults, and the rest were kids. This is one of those things that kind of makes you stop and catch your breath. And the church's principal pastor stayed behind, because the legal number of people on the bus could be 66 plus one driver. So he stayed off the trip knowing there were 4 adults, and he survived because he wasn't there. Only one of the adults survived. The other 3 adults perished along with 24 young people. So they leave on a Saturday morning, and it's a group of kids that have gone to North Hardin High, Alton Middle School, and Radcliffe Middle School. And it's mostly members of the Assembly of God Church, but they have also invited some guests. And that's why the head pastor, I love that his life was spared because he wanted to keep it legal. And if there had been one extra person, they somehow would have blamed him, even though you couldn't possibly have blamed him. But it's just interesting to me that, it's like the Buddy Holly, you stay off the plane that kills someone else. There's no winning in this story, but I promise you there are some beautiful gifts that come out of this horrible tragedy. I promise you there are. I wouldn't leave you hanging in such an awful story, but I promise you there are some really beautiful gifts that come out of this. So the bus is driven by John Pierman, and he's a local county clerk for Hardin County, but he's the associate pastor of the church. And his daughter, Christy, was in the back with her guest, who, spoiler alert, even though they both had injuries, they survived, and they get married. And they are still happily married to this day. And they shared their first kiss on that bus that was so ill-fated. So
wow.
I'm telling you, there are really good parts to this. So John Pierman drives the bus to Kings Island, and it's completely uneventful. And they all have a fantastic day at the park. It starts to get early evening, and they load everybody onto the bus, and they take their time getting out. And as they're driving from Ohio, they cross over the river back into Kentucky and northern Kentucky. It's been about an hour they've been driving, and they stop to fill the 60-gallon fuel tank with gas. And then they resume the trip to Radcliffe. About 10:55, they're heading south on Interstate 71, right outside Carrollton, Kentucky. And the bus collides with a Toyota pickup truck that's traveling the wrong way. It's northbound in the southbound lanes. And it's at a high speed on a curved area of the highway. And the truck is driven by Larry Mahoney. He's a 34-year-old factory worker who was intoxicated, very intoxicated. He had been drinking at a bar. He left and went to some friend's house. The friends took his keys away. And the mistake that was made is that he told them he would stick to the side roads that was, late at night, and he would get home safely. And they eventually gave him his keys back. But he didn't stick to the side roads. And on the way home, he stopped and bought a 12-pack of Miller beer. There were a couple of cans missing after the accident, but they were still cold. After the accident, the police found them, and he had a few cans while driving. So Mr. Mahoney doesn't know what happened. He woke up in the hospital the next day, had no recollection. But he was somehow able to gain entrance to the southbound side of the freeway driving north. And the right front of his Toyota pickup truck hit the right front of the school bus. Now, when that happens, it breaks off the bus's suspension, and a leaf spring puts itself backward into the gas tank that's mounted underneath the bus, right outside the step well where you would walk up to the front door, and it renders it inoperative. So now it's leaking gas from the punctured fuel tank, and it's ignited sparks from the metal parts that are dragging on the freeway, on the highway. The seats are covered in a highly flammable polyurethane foam that's padded and covered. And within a minute, the temperature inside the bus rises to 2,000 degrees. And it just becomes a flash fire. It becomes a flash fire that's unsurvivable. Mr. Mahoney's right front of his Toyota pickup spins around and ends up hitting another car that was traveling alongside the bus, but that car, there were no injuries in that. And the awful part of a bus crash where there were no seat belts and apparently not the kind of safety conditions you want, no one would have died from their injuries, including Mr. Mahoney. He was injured. John Pierman, the bus driver, was injured. No one else died from... They wouldn't have died from their injuries. What they died from was smoke inhalation and being burned to death. So they could have survived a bus crash. They all could have walked out. And there were only 6 of 67 that made it out with minimal to no injuries. Everyone else had severe injuries or perished. Just perished in a flash fire that you didn't even know was coming, didn't know where it came from, how it happened. Just heartbreaking. So this bus, it was manufactured by Ford at a Kentucky plant in Louisville, and then it was shipped to Lima, Ohio, and the body was installed by the Superior Coach Company, and it's a big company, and it was certified, as a school bus on March 23rd of 1977. Now, they fulfilled what was required by federal regulations as to what could be certified as a as a school bus. So this bus had 10 years in operation as a school bus before Radcliffe Assembly of God bought the school bus. It was surplus from Meade County, and they'd owned the bus for about a year. And it had made several round trips to Kings Island, especially just July in 1987, 10 months before the crash. It had done the same trip. It had made, short moves, long moves. It was always taken care of, checked over regularly. It had been examined by people who that were members of the church, but also worked at a motor pool supervisor from Fort Knox. It had 2 new tires, commercial tires, put on it a week before the trip, and the front end suspension, and everything was taken care of and examined as thoroughly as possible. Now, about this bus. March 23rd of 1977, it comes off the line and is confirmed to be a sturdy, wonderful school bus. The distinction about this is that on April 1st of 1977, just 9 days after this particular bus had come off the line, they decided that the fuel tank needed a greater guard and a guard frame, that there needed to be greater access to emergency exits and a greater number of emergency exits. A clear space needed to be in the rear emergency exit, and all of these things were required by revised federal regulations on all school buses built for use in the United States 9 days later.
So the federal regulations regarding the construction of school buses was amended and that went into effect 9 days after this bus came off the line.
Yep.
So, yeah.
It had 10 years in service, with no issues and then became, a bus used by a church, not a school. And there is a distinction, which we'll talk about legally later, which just kills me. A bus is a bus is a bus, and they should all have all the same safety measures. It kind of kills me here.
Yeah, well, you can bet that Ford knew that the regulation was going into effect, and they probably had the old equipment to build the old according to the old regulations, and they probably needed to get as many of those buses manufactured before the new regulations went into effect. So I'm sure that they were rushing out buses at that point to avoid having to comply with the new regulations.
Well, I don't want to point fingers, but let's just say there was civil suits that were settled. So we'll just say that. So honestly, nobody aboard that bus was severely injured by the actual collision. And John Pierman, the associate pastor who drove the bus, had some injuries, but was apparently, from testimony, was just kicked into gear and tried to put everything out with a very small fire extinguisher. He stood up and tried to help everyone out first, and he perished. And Larry Mahoney had injuries and was hospitalized, but he wouldn't have died. No one would have died from the actual accident. These were all injuries that could have been healed. No one had to die. This is the part that you feel your heart cracking in half. So there was one chaperone who was a very small woman, and she actually managed to squeeze herself out of a 9-inch by 24-inch window that was open on the left side. Everyone on the right side perished. And people from the left side too, because there was no way to get out. The front door became inoperable during the crash because of the suspension crushing it. So there was a small window left open on the left side, and this very small woman squeezed herself out. She was the only adult survivor of the 4 adults. And when she got to the ground 3 feet down and turned around, there were flames coming out of that window. Literally within a few minutes, it was clear that the people that were left on the bus were not going to make it. Obviously, passerbys were there before any sort of emergency crew because it happened so quickly, and the passerbys were trying to get as many people out as possible when they saw that the entire bus had become engulfed, mostly because of the seats, the flammable materials, and the unfortunate, condition that they had stopped to get gas just minutes before. They were packed with fuel and ready to explode. This will come into play later, but now school buses use diesel fuel because it's much less flammable than regular gasoline. All the things you learn in hindsight, right?
Right.
Yeah. So according to the NTSB, there, were 60 people trying to reach the only available exit, which is the rear emergency door. One of the things mentioned in the documentary, Impact After the Crash, is that a lot of the survivors were young, strong, able-bodied men. A lot of school athletes. It makes sense. The strong survive. You don't think about it in case of a bus crash. But I think when your life and everyone else's life is in peril, you think about saving yourself. There are many stories that are so heartbreaking of people on the bus that are attempting to move people that are injured and burnt that have made it out. One story is a young man who said, "This is our friend, Karina. I'll get her hands, you get her feet." She was unrecognizable. And his female friend said, "I can't do it." And he said, "Come on, this is Karina, we can do it." And she said, "No, you don't understand. I can't grab her legs because it's too hot. It's burning my hands." So he grabbed her by her arms and drug her over to a grass median. You can't imagine unless you've been through it. And I hope no one listening has been through this. The passerbys realized that they had to help the people that were out get them far away from the bus before it imploded even more, because they could see the people on the bus were not going to get out. And that's 27 souls, 27 lives, 26 passengers and one bus driver, and they're gone. Things that contributed to this besides the accident: the construction of the bus, as we've discussed, the full tank of gas, one other exit, the emergency exit in the back, and the front door, which was inoperable. There was a beverage cooler that was placed in the aisle near row 10, and there was only 11 rows. And it was hard to get over the beverage cooler to get out. I mean, it's like a series of things that you think you're doing that are right, and then you find out how wrong they are. You don't think you're going to have a problem filling your tank with gas. You don't know that what you're creating is a potential ball of fire if someone is driving the wrong way, because you don't think about that. You don't think about the fact that you're bringing a cooler with beverages to save people money so they don't have to buy $12 Cokes at an amusement park, and it's going to block the aisleway so people can't get out in case of an emergency. So when John Pierman is trying to put the fire out, and Christy, his daughter, is screaming, "Dad, Dad, Dad," and she's being pushed out of the back, and she survives, and she marries her sweetheart, and her sweetheart husband says he remembers Mr. Pierman looking back in the mirror at him sitting next to his daughter Christy, and like, I'm watching you, buddy. I got my eyes on you, sitting next to my girl. It's just the sweetest. It's the sweetest story. So when emergency crews get there, it's things they've never seen. It's things the Kentucky State Police have never seen and hope to never see again. It's things that the coroner, the Kentucky State coroner, said he had never seen anything like it. He's a coroner, and he's never seen anything like it. And they realized that to get people out and to understand what happened, they have to move the entire crime scene. So instead of the task of removing bodies, which they had done, and had taken to a Kentucky State Armory to set up a makeshift morgue when you have 27 bodies in a small town, they loaded the bus onto a flatbed truck and transported it to the National Guard Armory. And that's where they look at what happened, the interior of the bus, seat by seat, to find bodies. Most of them are burned beyond recognition. Most of them were found facing the exit door, but couldn't get it there. And the coroner determined that none of the occupants suffered from broken bones or any injury that would have killed them, but they died from smoke inhalation and from the fire. There's a lot of injuries. There's Karina, the one whose legs had been too hot to grab by her friend. One of her legs has been amputated just below the knee. Lots of others suffered disfiguring burns. There's another documentary called The Phoenix about Harold Dennis, who was this handsome young man who was badly burned, over 60% of his body, and ended up walking onto the field at University of Kentucky and playing football. He walked on. Because once you've survived something like that, walking onto a football field and making the team and having a bunch of men coming at you probably feels like nothing. And he really showed his heart and his soul. He won a lot of awards and was a really integral part of the UK football team. He ended up carrying an Olympic torch. He's just an amazing guy and a very humble, easy speaker. He's one of my favorite parts of the documentary, and his story is beautiful. He's happily married and has a family. It's one of the beautiful parts of this. So, of course, leave it to a politician to make this something they can stand on. So, about 1 week after the collision, Governor Wallace Wilkinson ordered his cabinet to review the state's drunk driving laws and bus safety regulations. A little too little, a little too late, but about a week after the bus crash, he had a press conference and said that there would be stricter enforcement of drunk driving by the state, including sobriety checkpoints. They would do more frequent inspections of the state alcoholic beverage control. I don't know how you can really regulate that, but good luck, Governor. But he also said that he would support increased safety standards for buses and training for bus drivers. And then the state actually began offering free safety inspections for privately owned buses, which is where this could have fallen between the cracks. You know, they had upped the safety standards for school buses, but once the bus has been sold to a private owner, like a church, some of those standards you don't have to meet. So now Kentucky requires all school buses to have 9 emergency exits, which is more than any other federal or state standard. That includes like front and back doors, a side door, 4 emergency windows, and 2 roof exits. The bus that crashed in Carrollton just had the front and the back. They also now insist the school buses have diesel-powered fleets instead of gasoline because diesel fuel doesn't burn as fast. So no matter what you feel about what happened and about Larry Mahoney, honestly, there are other contributing factors to making the crash so awful. It's the loopholes, between the laws and procedures for a school bus as opposed to, if a vehicle has been released for non-school service. Had the bus been built new, this is the part that breaks my heart. Had it been built new in March of 1977 for a non-school use, it would have been applicable to motor vehicle standards that would have required it have been built with more emergency exits. Why it took till, April 1st of 1977 for school buses to have more safety regulations.
That's surprising.
It is horribly surprising. It's, one of the mothers said, who lost the youngest victim, her 10-year-old daughter, Patty, I thought she was safe. She was going on a school bus. It's just, I don't understand, and it's not for me to understand. But it was fascinating, the timing. Why would a school bus have less safety regulations than a bus used as a motor coach for, personal uses? And that's a question that nobody's gonna be able to answer. It's very rhetorical, but I still am wondering what could have caused this. Why? I'm just going to be asking a question that can never be answered.
It can't. You want to find something, but all you do is grasp. There's no answer.
Yeah, there's no answer to that one until something terrible happens and then suddenly everyone kicks into gear. That's the part that you want to try and be proactive. You don't want to have to go through a terrible tragedy to then get your shit together and fix it. So Larry Mahoney had actually had a previous arrest for DUI in 1984. He was fined $300 and his license was suspended for 6 months. And at the time of the crash, his alcohol blood level was at 0.24, which is...
Oh my God.
I know. At that time, the Kentucky limit was 0.10. He had no memory of the crash. He was so obliterated. He didn't know what happened. He, by all accounts, is this simple factory worker who wouldn't hurt a fly, who was kind to everyone, but obviously had an alcohol issue. He seemed nothing but contrite, and I don't know how he could be anything else because he didn't even know what happened. He wasn't even aware of what happened, what he did. He was sentenced to 16 years in the Carroll County Circuit Court. He was convicted of 27 counts of manslaughter in the second degree, 16 counts of assault in the second degree, and 27 counts of wanton endangerment in the first degree. So Judge Anthony Wilhoit of the Kentucky Court of Appeals reversed Mahoney's conviction for drunk driving on the grounds that it constituted double jeopardy under the Kentucky Constitution. He ruled that the 27 counts of manslaughter in the second degree subsumed the drunk driving conviction, and the court ruled that under Kentucky law, the elements of drunk driving were substantially similar to those of manslaughter. This meant that his driver's license could be reinstated even during his imprisonment, but he didn't do that. When Mahoney was in the Kentucky State Reformatory, he worked in a minimum security facility. He was a clerk. While there, he earned his GED, his high school equivalency. He went to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and jailers all described him as a model prisoner. This was pretty interesting to me. His incarceration was reduced by 6 years with good behavior, known as the Kentucky law for, good time credit. And he declined the parole board's recommendation that he get the 6 years shaved off.
Wow.
Yeah. And he stayed in LaGrange prison for almost 11 years, 10 years and 11 months. So he stayed for an extra, year and didn't take the early release because I think he felt bad. And he apparently still feels bad. They've asked him to speak at high schools about the dangers of drunk driving or do any sort of, kind of outreach work, and he's declined. And I understand that fact sticks in Tipster Rebecca's craw. I also understand why he declined to do so, because if you think back to Mary Vincent a few episodes ago from Survivor Month, she was hitchhiking and was victimized by a horrible person who raped and sodomized her repeatedly, dismembered her by cutting her arms off, and threw her in a ditch to die. And yet her will to live was so strong that she crawled up 3 miles to the 5 freeway, which is a very busy freeway, and got help so she could survive. And the first time she went to speak to high school students about the dangers of hitchhiking, a young male student yelled out, "You got what you deserve." And to this day, she refuses to speak to high school students about the dangers of hitchhiking, which most people don't do anymore, but was very prevalent in her day. And I understand. And if that happened to her, and Mr. Mahoney went to speak to any group of people, high school students or otherwise, about the dangers of drunk driving, I believe he would be run out of town with torches and pitchforks. In fact, he might not survive a speaking engagement. So I understand why it bothers Tipster Rebecca that he hasn't spoken to groups. And I also understand why he has not spoken to groups. And I give him a pass because I believe him turning down an early release for good behavior and staying in prison for his entire term that he was supposed to be there, I think that shows a lot. When you turn down freedom after 10 years because you feel you need to stay there, your entire sentence for what you've done, I think that's enough. I think that shows you've paid your debt to society. It may not be a debt that anyone agrees with, and I don't care if you don't agree with me. I'm okay with him not doing speaking engagements, but I understand why people might be upset. So I promise you the good parts of this. One of the beautiful stories is that Joy Williams and Kristen and Robin Williams were among those who were killed. And Lee Williams, who was an associate pastor at the church, was left with no wife and no daughters. And a real questioning of his faith, and a depression, as one can imagine, and a grief that is unimaginable. And Dottie Pierman, whose husband, John Pierman, the associate pastor, was the driver, who was killed, and her daughter, her beautiful daughter, Christy, survived and is just as beautiful today as you can imagine, and happy with her husband. That was their first kiss on the bus. Lee Williams contacts Dottie Pierman after about a year, and they meet for coffee, and both of them in their grief. They were both members of the Assembly of God Church, but barely knew each other. And one coffee date turns into one dinner date, and once a month turns into twice a month, and they eventually get married.
Oh,
it's beautiful.
That is.
It's beautiful. And they both volunteer for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Lee is a former chapter president of MAD and of the Hardin County chapter, and Dottie Williams is the current president. And they speak to school groups, and they go to health fairs and talk about, the dangers of driving while intoxicated. And Dottie says, if I can persuade one person not to drink and drive, I've won. And it's really important to educate children early on about the dangers. It's a problem you address early before it becomes a problem. And that's the kind of mindset we need about safety for large buses and coaches that carry a large amount of people. And it's typically the bus drivers that are safe, and it's typically something outside them that they can't control that causes the problems. It's amazing. I know things are much safer now, but still, the largest drunk driving tragedy still in Carrollton, Kentucky in 1988. One of the stories in the documentary that touched me so much was one of the first responders, a former Kentucky State Police trooper named Henry Sonny Cease. He always went by Sonny, who was so overwhelmed by what he saw that a year and a half after the accident, he couldn't understand why he couldn't function, what was happening to him. And he ended up at the Mayo Clinic, where he was diagnosed with PTSD. And I will tell you that he was the person I was going to reach out to as far as speaking to me about this story. And when I did a little more research, I realized I just did not want to reach out to anyone involved in this story because they've been through enough. They've talked about it a lot. They've participated in lots of media. And I don't want to bother the people that survived or that lost family members. I just didn't want to bother them anymore. And I thought maybe the perfect person who was so personable and amenable and had gone through his own traumatic experience was Trooper Cease. But apparently things have weighed heavily on him because after what he witnessed, which gave him a diagnosis of PTSD and a neurologist who told him to find another line of work, he himself was arrested for DUI on July 26th of 2010 at 4 a.m. in Shively, Kentucky. He was driving on 7th Street and Crumbs Lane. The report said he was swerving unsteady and off balance. And when given a breathalyzer, a former Trooper Cease blew a .133, which is above the Kentucky limit of now .08. And if you think that he didn't suffer by what he saw, and apparently it's coming out in a way that isn't the most healthy, I think the long arm of this accident is longer and deeper than any of us can really imagine. So the Courier-Journal in Louisville, who I said, received the Pulitzer Prize, they published an account that said some of the survivors were willing to forgive Mahoney. And a lot of that is because they feel that they were members of the First Assembly of God. Not everybody who goes to a church is going to have that kind of forgiveness or ability. But it doesn't matter if you belong to a church. It doesn't matter what dogma you believe or you don't believe. Forgiveness is for you. not the other person. Forgiveness, no matter what they've done, is for you. Forgiveness is to give you whatever part of your life back that you think someone may have taken. It's permission for you to get your life back. They always say that, not forgiving someone is like drinking poison and hoping it hurts the other person. And that's a little severe, but it's also pretty true. So the people that forgive him, and I'm sure they have days where they don't, but for the most part, the people that have forgiven him are going to have much better lives moving on. And it's the toughest thing I would think anyone would have to do. If you have been, injured yourself, if a family member has been taken from you, it's the toughest thing you'd have to do. But probably one of my favorite stories is the youngest victim, 10-year-old Patty Nunley, Patricia Susan Nunley, Patty. Her mother, Carrollton, became an active member of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and she actually went on 8 years later to become the national president of MADD. And she still to this day says, they were traveling on a school bus. I thought she'd be safe. And just a few days before the accident, 10-year-old Patty Nunley had written an essay that she got to read, and it's videotaped, and it's beautiful. And she says, at 10 years old, Patty Nunley says, in life there are many choices to be made. Sometimes we lack the knowledge to make decisions and must learn from our mistakes. You must learn from your mistakes and the mistakes of others. You have to look for your destiny. The wise words of a 10-year-old Patty Nunley, who is only going to be on the earth a few more days, and probably had no idea the number of lives she would touch. But I'm going to remember that I have to look for my destiny. And I hope that you Tip-Sters take time to look for your destiny, and thank you for being part of our destiny. And this wraps up the 100th episode of Just the Tip-Sters. There would be no us without you, and more cowbell.
And if you want to become a patron of the podcast, go to patreon.com/justthetipsters. Call us at 832-TIPSTER. Send us an email at jttipsters@gmail.com.